Hard to believe that the Bulls have already played 41 games halfway through the season when it feels like it was just yesterday that the season started. And while I'm sure we all wish their record was a little better, currently sitting 19-22 and 9th in the Eastern Conference, could have been a lot worse though based on what we saw this team at the start of the season when it looked like the Bulls were going to be right on their way to the lottery and on the verge of blowing up the entire roster. But the Bulls have somewhat turned their season around the last 20 games or so with the 5th best record in said time frame, and now that we enter the second half of the season, the question now remains, how will the Bulls close out this year? What trades will be made as we approach the NBA trade deadline in a few weeks? But while we anxiously anticipate the back half of the season, I figure what better time than to do my mid-season recap, awards, surprises, disappointments, all of that good stuff, and then I'll end it with my predictions and expectations for the rest of the season. Speaking of predictions though, and if you're maybe even looking to win some money with your predictions and getting some free money for just signing up, then you're going to want to hear about this offer from Underdog Fantasy. For those that aren't familiar with Underdog, let me tell you about the app and my personal favorite that I use on the app, NBA Pick'ems. With Pick'ems, you can pick higher or lower on most players' stats and win money based on the ones you get right. You pick higher or lower and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night if you do 5 Pick'ems and you get them all right. If you think Coby White is going to score more than 21 points tonight against the Cavs, you select higher and you can win some money. And guys, they're offering viewers of this channel an exclusive offer. If you use the promo code BullsCentral, you'll get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Like I said, who doesn't want free money, right? It's really that simple. It's also a great way to help support the channel as well. I'll leave a link to the site and the code in the description if you're interested, and let me know what picks you guys end up making. Now, before the start of the season, I always give my preseason Bulls awards on who I think will be the Bulls MVP, Most Improved Player of the Year, Sixth Man of the Year, etc., just for the Bulls roster. And while sometimes some of those predictions can be a bit obvious, I feel like going halfway through the year, that really hasn't been the case based on what we've seen from the Bulls so far this season, because while I think a lot of people will still agree that DeMar DeRozan is probably the Bulls' best player, you might say Zach Lavine now that he's been looking fully healthy again and looking like an all-star type player. The fact of the matter is, if you're talking about the MVP for the Bulls so far this year, halfway through, I honestly feel like there is a world where you can say that this belongs to Coby White. And the same can obviously be said for the Most Improved Player of the Year award, because no one has improved more year over year on this roster than Coby White. Like, it really isn't even that close. In fact, you could argue Coby White is a top candidate for the Most Improved Player of the Year award in the NBA. So if you had to give an MVP award to someone on this roster for half the season, I feel like I have to go with Coby White, with DeMar being a close second. Now, DeMar has been more consistent than Coby has throughout the season because Coby started off the year really bad, so bad to the point we were talking about how he needed to be taken out of the starting lineup. And then, of course, Coby had that brief stretch of a shooting slump where he cooled down quite a bit after shooting a ridiculous 50+% from 3 on high volume for a couple of weeks. But in terms of the overall value, the impact on winning, the impact on bringing this team back to life, getting the guys energized again, being that positive voice in the locker room, bringing the good vibes, I give more credit to Coby on that one than I do DeMar. So yes, midway through the season, Coby is my most valuable player, my most improved player as well. Defensive Player of the Year? For the Bulls anyway, another easy one, no question, Alex Caruso, who is likely on his way to another all-defensive team as long as he can stay healthy. Both Ayo and Pat have been great on defense, but not to the level of impact we've seen from AC, who is just constantly a dog on defense, getting in passing lanes, so good at navigating screens, drawing charges, pickpocketing guys to the basket. Too easy for that award for him. And then as far as Sixth Man of the Year on the Bulls, I mean, this is probably the toughest one, mainly because guys have been in and out of the starting lineup and coming off the bench. Patrick Williams has been starting and then coming off the bench. Alex Caruso has taken his spot in the starting lineup more recently, but then also Caruso has come off the bench a fair amount of times this season. Torrey Craig was great in the second unit, but he's been injured and hasn't been playing more recently. Javon Carter has been up and down in the second unit. Yeah, I honestly don't know. This might surprise some folks, but I'm actually going to go with Ayo Dosunmu, mainly because Ayo has consistently been coming off the bench, whereas Caruso has started in 22 games so far this year. Pat has started in 27 games, but Ayo has low-key been so underrated for the Bulls. You're talking about a great bounce-back season after a sophomore slump. I wouldn't call it a breakout year by any means, but he's been very valuable in the second unit, not only for his defense, but also he's been impacting the game offensively. Case in point, the game the other night in San Antonio, where Ayo was a big difference maker in being a scoring spark off the bench, efficient on the floor, shooting 8 for 9, 21 points. I mean, overall this season, he's improved his scoring, his efficiency, gotten that three-point shot back to where we saw it in his rookie year. He's much better at finishing around the rim, improved court vision as well, and he's doing all of this on lower minutes than he's used to seeing. Love what we've been seeing from Ayo so far this year, and more importantly, knowing his role, accepting his role, and doing what needs to be done to help this team win. Now, as far as surprises and disappointments go, I'm going to start with some of the surprises this season, which I guess some of these surprises might inevitably end up being disappointments, but one of the biggest surprises so far this season has to be the ascendance of Coby White. Look, we all knew Coby had showed signs of improvement last season, even though his numbers weren't up. The way that he was playing, the skills he had developed in terms of his improved ball handling, improved passing, decision making, better effort and execution on defense, a quicker first step in getting the basket. Like, even though Coby had impressed a lot of Bulls fans who were down and out on him and wanted him traded, he had more or less earned his trust and respect back from Bulls fans, in large part because he hustled and worked hard to get to where he was. But even the most optimistic Coby fans, I don't think would have expected to see what we've been seeing from Coby to start this season. Like, people joked about how Coby White would be a most improved player of the year candidate, and now he legitimately is. And there's an argument that he has a case for being an all-star. I don't think he'll be selected as an all-star, but the fact that we're even having this discussion is saying something. You're talking about a guy who most people thought would never be more than a role player, a player who the Bulls signed to an incredibly team-friendly deal at 3 years, $33 million, which is now looking like one of the biggest steals of the offseason. Like, no one would have expected Coby to look this good this season. This was a player most people thought was still going to be coming off the bench behind Jevon Carter. Coby putting up 18.5 points per game on efficient shooting, the best of his career, and also one of the top 3-point shooters in the league, shooting 40% on over 7 attempts per game. He's improved in damn near every statistical category, averaging 5 assists per game, 4.5 rebounds. Despite his usage, he's turning the ball over at a very low rate, speaking to how much he's improved his handles and decision making on the court. So yes, of all the surprises, this has to be the biggest one for the Bulls, because if anyone told me Coby White was going to be a borderline all-star by mid-season, I would have thought you needed to be committed. As far as other surprises, and I might go through some of these a little more quickly, but definitely did not expect Alex Caruso would be one of the better 3-and-D guys in the NBA. After a pretty poor shooting season last year for AC, I did not expect him to be shooting near 42% from 3-on-4 attempts per game, which is the highest volume for him shooting it from deep for his career. I also wouldn't have expected the Bulls to shoot the 3 ball as well as they have, which I'm not saying it's great. They're still 18th in the NBA and 21st in overall threes attempted, but compared to last year, where they were dead last in the league in 3-point volume, I expected their 3-point rate to increase a little bit just because it was such an emphasis going into the offseason and they added a couple shooters via free agency. But seeing the Bulls put up considerably more threes and hitting them at a decent rate has been a surprise. Like, even DeMar has been shooting it more from behind the arc and on a decent clip as well at 36%. As far as other surprises, and I guess these are more of the surprises that led to disappointments, was not expecting that we would see the drama early on from Zach Lavine wanting to be traded. I mean, we kind of knew this was going to be the last go-around of this core for the Bulls, but that early Zach news of him wanting out actually happened, like 10 or 11 games into the season? Also related to that, disappointed and surprised by just how bad the Bulls were to start the year, kicking things off going 5-14 in the standings, looking non-competitive with no grit, edge, or energy of any kind. The guys looked checked out. They looked like they hated playing together. The vibes were bad. Body language, demeanor, everything was pointing to this being a quick teardown before the season ends. And so I guess with that, it was a huge surprise to see that the Bulls bounce back in the way they did, because you really thought there was nothing saving this team. And while there's still not a great team and changes still need to happen, the fact that they were able to come together, start playing better team basketball, changing their mentality and attitude, and actually looking like a fun team again was very surprising, when I think most of us, including myself, had already said this season was all but over by the end of November. Other disappointments, just some quick ones here. Jevon Carter, really thought he was going to provide a bigger impact in not only helping the Bulls' overall shooting profile, but their tenacity and effort on the defensive end, and neither of those has really come to fruition. He's had some nice games here and there, but not a reliable and consistent shooting threat for the Bulls. This other one, I don't know if I would necessarily call it a disappointment, but I was expecting more from Patrick Williams. Now, Pat has looked a lot better since Zach Lavine has been out, and even after he's returned, he was getting more touches, more shots up, and so I don't think calling Pat a disappointment is fair to say when he's been solid so far this season, but I was hoping, like a Coby White, for a bigger breakout year, especially when the Bulls have really needed it from him. And we're kind of just seeing the same level of Patrick Williams from last season with some added aggression, shot creation, and drives to the basket so far this year. Hopefully we see a strong second half to the year from Patrick Williams, especially when he comes back healthy. As far as my predictions, though, for the rest of the season, I mean, this is really tough to say because a lot of it depends on what the Bulls do at the deadline. Do they trade Zach? Do they not trade Zach? Do they actually push to rebuild and move on from the big three, maybe even Alex Caruso as well? Or do they stand pat, which honestly would not shock me at this point? Or do they make minor moves on the margins? But based on what we know now, as well as how other teams in the East are trending, I do think the Bulls will make the play-in. They're creating enough separation from teams like the Nets, the Hawks, and the Raptors, playing much better than all of those teams, and the Bulls have one of the easier schedules in the league in the back half of the year, so I do think they'll make the play-in, probably finish around 500, and I'm even going to go as to say that they make the playoffs as the 7th or 8th seed, so getting into the playoffs by way of the play-in, but get knocked out in the first round because there's no way they're going to be able to beat the Bucks or the Celtics in a 7-game series. It's just not happening. But hey, all of this is just me. What are your guys' predictions for the second half of the year? Where do you see the Bulls finishing? What awards would you give out so far this year? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.